Today's episode is brought to you by our company, NanoChomp Marketing Strategy and Analytics. We help product and marketing teams solve problems and experience growth using data and approachable AI. Visit nanochomp.com to learn more. Today on Soundbites, we have Tom Schwab, CEO of Interview Valet. Interview Valet uses strategic placement on targeted podcasts to get high-impact marketing outcomes for their clients, whatever their goals might be. Tom talks us through his entrepreneurial journey, identifying opportunities, and shifting to podcasting when guest blogging lost its efficacy. He talks us through the impact that podcasting is having on elevating his clients and their brand. Here's Tom. Hey everyone, welcome to this episode of Soundbites. We have a really great guest today, Tom Schwab, who's the founder and CEO of Interview Valet. Tom has a really fascinating journey. Comes from being a naval veteran to working in medical devices industry, an author, an entrepreneur, and we're really thrilled to have him as a guest. But we want to talk about Interview Valet because they really help thought leaders, entrepreneurs, coaches, nonfiction authors talk directly to their audiences and their clients through targeted podcasting. So you have a really big push into targeted podcast marketing, and we want to dive into that. But Tom, thanks for joining us today.
I am thrilled to be here. Thank you for having me.
So Tom, let's start. This is a big question, but let's start with the backstory, the superhero backstory. What path did you start on that got you to here?
It only makes sense in the rearview mirror. So I graduated from the U.S. Naval Academy in Annapolis, and that was a technical error. Literally, I got in with an oversight, but I made it through. And
that's what counts.
I did. And I was like, yes, I don't have to go to sea because I have no depth perception. And they came back and said, no, we're going to give you a waiver because we need nuclear power operators. And so I went through nuclear power school, ran the power plants on an aircraft carrier. At the time, it was the newest and finest, the USS Abraham Lincoln. And it really taught me the idea of systems and processes and testing things. And when you learn something, it's okay to have mistakes, right? But just make sure you don't make them more than once, right? If there was ever a mistake on one ship, everybody in the fleet knew it within hours of like, hey, this is broken, don't do this. And so it really taught me a methodology of doing business and seeing life. And I really took that on with me. Like you said, I worked for a medical device company, Stryker. That's what got me to Kalamazoo. Worked as an engineer, then in operations and out in sales. And I loved it. It was all problem solving. And when I sold my distributorship back, I started an e-commerce company. And I had just read a book by two smart guys out of MIT, Brian Halligan and Dharmesh Shah, who formed HubSpot. And I read this book about inbound marketing that made a whole lot of sense. And I said, has anybody ever tried this for e-commerce? And they said, no, but it should work. And I said, I think so too. Let's give it a shot. So we were their first e-commerce case study, built that business up, sold it off. And then in about 2013, 2014, I was in a mastermind group and somebody asked, well, how did you build your business? I said, well, with guest blogging, but that doesn't work anymore, right? That was over a decade ago and guest blogging didn't work. But I hypothesized that you could use podcast interviews just like we used to use guest blogging, right? Get that know, like, and trust, tap into audiences. Worked well. I just wrote a cheesy little book on it and a course. And like so many things in business, right? You've got to plan, and then the market tells you otherwise. And what the actual customers and clients said is, listen, I just want to be the guest. You take care of everything else. So we started to beta test that. And for the first few years of Interview Valet, I give my elevator pitch and people go, what's a podcast? And then it really started to take off. Now we have 38 people on our team in Europe and North America, serving about 150 clients.
Wow, that's amazing. And when you think about it, you mentioned, it doesn't make sense if you're looking at it from the general progression, but when you look at it in the rearview mirror, it really, really does. And I think the test and iterate approach, that scientific method that works all over the place, and children are taught it in school, not enough people actually really truly apply it. And we see it all the time, and we fall victim to ourselves because we're like, nobody likes failing. And a lot of times that scientific process along the way, part of it, you have these micro failures over and over and over again before one of those paths on the decision tree really works. And then you get to double down on it. And then you get to double down on it.
I am curious. Sorry, go ahead. I was going to say, I am curious. You were talking about how guest blogging doesn't work anymore. And that was a true statement. But I feel like, was it like 2012, 2013 when you started, 2013, 2014, you mentioned that's when you were like, hey, let's go in on podcasting. But what about podcasting like stuck out to you? Because I feel like during that time, to your point, people were saying, what's a podcast? So what about it was enticing to you?
Well, maybe it was a personal thing
Mm.
because for me, creating a blog is a homework assignment, right? I've done a
Mhm.
lot of them, but it
Yeah.
always felt like a homework assignment. But having conversations, answering questions made a whole lot of sense. And
Yeah.
so for me, it was a very easy um, content to create, but also very, very rich. Right. When
Mhm.
someone reads a blog, you don't really get to know the person, you get the ideas, but there was an intimacy of podcast interviews, almost like public speaking. And to me, I live in Kalamazoo, Michigan, right? There's not a whole lot of big conferences that come here. So for me, public speaking meant getting on a plane and going somewhere,
Mhm.
whereas a podcast interview meant at that time jumping on Skype and doing an audio conversation. Today, most of them are video, but it's still such an easy method and a platform to create and disseminate.
Yeah, I think in to your point, the dissemination of it, the being able to have that content that you can push out over and over again versus going to a conference, speaking at one event, and then 15 people see it, and that's about it, right? On a podcast, especially now, the searchability is so high, the SEO is so high, the video content's engaging, and then in your client base, your potential target client base, they feel like they know you already. They feel like what makes you tick already. We have someone that we had on early on who was sending his episode of the podcast to recruiters, to people he wanted to work with, to potential clients. And that was working because he didn't have to, he's like, hey, you want to find out what I'm really about? Watch the first 15 minutes of this and let me know what you think.
I remember we had a client that spoke at Marlins Stadium in front of
Mm.
35,000 people. And the night before, I was talking with him and he was nervous. And I'm like, you've talked to more people than this on podcasts. And he's like,
Right.
yeah, but they weren't looking back at me. And afterwards, we talked about it and thought, if somebody heard him there speaking at Marlins Stadium, what if they had to get out to go to the restroom or take a call? They couldn't hit pause. What if they
Yeah.
loved the talk and wanted to tell their boss about it? Well, now they have to remember it and try to tell it differently. And we both talked about podcast interviews take care of all of that because you can watch it when you want or listen to it when you want, where you want, at the speed you want. If you have to pause it, that's fine. And then if all of a sudden I hear something and think, oh, Lauren would love this, I can say, hey, I listened to this. I thought of you. Check out minute 14. And the
Mhm.
chances of someone else listening to that is incredibly high. So it's a great medium. And it's much like tapping into old audiences when it was on television, radio, the Lions Club, whatever it was. But today it's just more powerful and easier.
I
What
think
do you
something you said there. Go ahead. Sorry.
I was going to say, what do you say to people who think that everyone's got a podcast and it's a saturated market, but it's also very fragmented, right? Because you have these niche audiences. Is that a good or a bad thing for your
Well,
business and your customers and
uh,
clients?
there's a lot of data out there that just isn't so, right? You'll hear
Mm,
the number, there are 4 million podcasts. That's true. But less than 400,000 have actually published something in the
mm,
last 30 days, right? As you know, it's easy and fun to start a podcast. It's hard to keep it going, right?
yes.
And
Yeah.
anybody that says it's easy has never even done it or never done it well.
Mm,
So there's always room for one more ideal, great podcast, right? We don't need just more noise. So I don't think it's saturated from that standpoint, especially when you start looking at how many blogs were there, how
right.
many, even television stations and networks are there. And there's something for everyone. I think the idea that I'm going to start a podcast and be the next Joe Rogan, um, it probably isn't going to work, right? Because people
Yeah.
forget he did a whole lot of work.
Years.
He was Joe Rogan before the Joe Rogan
That's
podcast.
true.
But if you've got a niche audience that you want to talk to, if you've got a following, that's a great way to do it. And even when clients come to us and say, well, should I be a podcast guest or a podcast host? I don't think it's an either or. I think it's like Uber, right? It's a great
Mm.
platform, but should you be a driver or a passenger? It really depends on your goals. So being a guest is a great way to go out there and get new exposure, get new leads, get new backlinks. But being a host is a great way to nurture your current audience, to nurture your current leads and your customers. So I think it can be powerful from both sides of the microphone.
I think that's really great. And something you said even before that was interesting too, because a lot of people don't realize the power of video content or podcast content, that you don't have to send somebody a whole hour long message. You can use small little snippets of it. Lauren and I do this all the time with each other. We'll grab a piece of a podcast, audio record it, send that 30, 45 second snippet, or go, hey, go visit this, go to this timestamp. And it's really interesting. And I think that creates consumable content even beyond having to manually chop it up yourself, so you can get more reach. And it gives you an excuse to contact someone you haven't contacted in a month, 6 months, a year. Be like, hey, heard this, thought of you, let's jump on a call, but listen to this first.
Yeah, my team always talks about that if I talk for 45 minutes, they can get 90 seconds of gold in there, or
Yeah.
a tweet or a quote, something like that. And that's why it's so powerful, is that it's easy to create, right? There's a great book called They Ask You Answer by Marcus Sheridan.
Hmm.
And he basically says that's what you should be doing, answering people's questions. And that's what you're doing on podcast interviews. And our best clients, like you said, will take an interview and cut it up, right? There's a little segment here. They can get the transcript from it, can, put it up different places. I saw one client do it on their frequently asked questions. There's the question. And then it was the founder answering it on a podcast. So it wasn't like just, it looked like an AI synthesia just talking to answer. No, somebody actually asking them that and them answering it. So it's
Mm.
very, very powerful.
Yeah, I think it's a really great medium. And when we started doing it, we were really looking to see how can we have fun conversations with people that we normally wouldn't talk to or we wouldn't have access to. And when as a host, we sat back and thought, if we start reaching out to people and say, hey, we have this product or service, let's chat. They might not be interested, but you have a CEO, a founder, a co-founder of a company that might be target market for us. We're like, we have a podcast where we want to hear your journey. Are you interested in chatting? You bet. Let's get on the calendar. It changes the conversations that you're able to have. And then, even further for us, what was interesting is when you have those conversations. Now I've chatted with that person a few times. We've had an hour long. They tell us what their problems and challenges are. And then afterwards, we can say, how would you like to address those? And then we can have deeper conversation that we normally wouldn't be able to have.
I love the word you kept using in there of conversations,
Yeah.
because one of the things that I pull my hair out, um, is this idea of you're one funnel away, right? Now, I'm a
Mhm.
big fan of automation. I think there's a great need for it and a great use for it. But the idea that, oh, I'll just build a funnel and I'm one funnel away. It doesn't work, right? The best things in life don't come through a funnel, right? I
Mhm.
didn't meet my future bride by doing a funnel and sending Facebook traffic to it. No, it came from a conversation, from an introduction. And I think that's where it's so powerful. And I think in business, especially, there's a difference between a transaction and a relationship sale, right? So if you're just
Mhm.
trying to sell a $2 widget, all right, do funnel and paid ads. But if you're thinking that you're going to do a substantial business relationship, there's a great book called Clicksand, How Digital Marketing's Ruining Your Business. And I love how Bill Troy says big fish don't swim through funnels and whales don't click. It starts with a conversation. And, that's what this is all about. And the other thing too is the best marketing makes the sales easier. After somebody hears you for 30 or 45 minutes, they turn you up or turn you off. And either one is fine. Marketing should be magnetic. It should attract the right people, but repel the wrong people.
Gosh, that's really interesting. I think digital marketing is killing your business. Or Clicksand is the name of the book. We'll have to read that. That's amazing. It's making me think like, or do you think people are resistant to like these conversations because they think it's harder now as we're going more remote? It's harder to really tap into maybe someone you don't know. I can see like podcasting as being an opportunity to do that. But, why do you think everyone is one funnel away? Why do you think that's the trend now? Is it easier?
I maybe it's what you were talking about before. There's less fear of rejection, right? Because if I talk to you and you tell me no or give me negative feedback, ooh, right? That hurts.
Yeah.
It's also very valuable, right? The great thing about business is you got to, do more of what the customers love and less of what they loathe. But I think often that idea of that you're one funnel away, we're trying to avoid feedback, right? I think of so many times where I'll say I'm working busy. I'm busy, right? I've sat here all weekend long and I've done beautiful this beautiful page, and I've got the sales landing page, and I've got the funnel and everything like that. It's perfect. Now all I've got to do is throw lots of money at it through Facebook and then hope that it works out. And it's like, well, have you done any market feedback? Have you talked to any people, right? And if you haven't, you're just throwing good money after bad on that to get feedback, right? In the Navy, we used to have a joke, and it was called, you have to be smart enough to know right answer when told. And I think the same thing applies to businesses, right? Have the conversations. If people say, oh, I love this part, I don't get this part, or this brings me no value, well, you've got to listen to them and double down on what's working. I always say the best piece of fiction I have ever read or written was a business plan, right? Every business plan goes up and to the right. Originally exponential growth, no road bumps. And, originally I thought, oh, okay, I'll write a book. I'll do a little course on this. And what my clients told me was that, no, I want you to do it. I just want to be the guest, right? I could have fought them for years and years, or I could have said, all right, that's what they want. That's what I need to work on.
Yeah, no, I think that's a lot of good information in there, a lot of good nuggets, like the magnetic piece of it. We think of magnets as attracting, but yeah, the other side of a magnet is it's designed, it repulses. You have to push away the things you don't need, so you have more time and energy for the things you do, so you can make sure your audience is there. Do you remember the first podcast you were on? So you came through this revelation of, hey, guest blogs don't work anymore, saturated market, and now even today, we see with generative AI tools being able to create so much guest blog content that it really doesn't work. But do you remember your first podcast and what that experience was?
I do, and it was scary as anything, right? And I think post-pandemic has been a whole lot easier because we're used to Zoom calls. But this was back when it was on Skype. And, I thought, oh, what if I don't know the answer? And the more I did of these, I realized that it's just a conversation, right? We call it a podcast interview, but it's a conversation. And people aren't trying to do gotchas. And once again, you share who you are, what you believe, and people will either resonate with that or they won't. And if they don't, that doesn't mean they're a bad person or you're a bad person. It just means that you're a bad fit for your company or whatever. And early on, I didn't do a lot of vetting. I didn't do a lot of strategy behind it. And it was sort of just more. And as we got onto it, we realized that, it's sort of that 80-20 rule. Well, how come these 20% give 80% of the results, and kept going down on there, and really came up with the system of, how do you vet the podcast? How do you find the right audience? How do you prepare? What's the best things to do at the end to move people from being passive listeners to active visitors to engaged leads? So I always share that openly with people, because if somebody's getting ready for their first interview, you know, learning from your own mistakes is painful, right? Learn from someone else's mistakes.
Yeah,
It's
that's
easier.
usually a little bit easier. So when you are working with your clients, or even for yourself, how are you selecting the podcast you're going to put somebody on? How are you putting that kit together and saying, you know what, I think there's a connection here and this should be a good conversation and good reach?
It starts with, what are the goals, right? No one's goal is, I want to get on a podcast. They want the results that come from that. So we'll talk about, what are your goals for this? And there's 9 fundamental goals, billing, leads that close faster, thought leadership, SEO, all of those things, right? Keynote speaking. So we'll go through and what their goals are there. And then we go through and say, well, who do you want to talk to? Right? Because not everybody wants to hear you. So we'll go
Mm-hmm.
through their avatar, their ideal client profile, you know, age, demographics, what they talk about. And then we use a lot of databases, right? We license about a dozen different databases. So if they say, I love the Sound Bites podcast, that would be great for me. Okay. Why? Right? Why is that audience there? And then we can use databases to look, well, these are other podcasts that are like that. Or even there's some databases out there now, it's almost spooky, where if somebody comes back and says, I want to be on Harvard Business Review IdeaCast. Well,
Mm-hmm.
if you didn't go to Harvard and have a PhD, they're probably not going to have
Not
you
gonna
on
get on
there.
there.
But ultimately, you want to talk to the people that listen to that.
Yeah.
So we license databases where we can go out there and say, okay, of everyone that goes to this conference or who visits this website or listens to this podcast, what other shows do they listen to? So it becomes a little bit of art, a little bit of science, and a whole lot of experience.
You mentioned starting and selling businesses before, so this was like, starting a business wasn't new to you. But aside from the awareness of podcasts when you first started, what were some other challenges about starting Interview Valet that surprised you?
Um, I think I don't always learn lessons every time,
Hmm.
right? I've had multiple businesses, and there's that first period there where you're so excited about the idea, right? Everybody should want this, but you're 5 steps ahead of them, right? I think of Henry Ford, right? When he started mass producing the car, and granted, cars had been around before that, people wanted a faster horse. There was a big
Right.
jump from there. So sometimes meeting people where they are. And another thing that really struck me, and is one of the best lessons I've ever learned, and most of the lessons I learn are from clients. And my last company, I was covering the phones during lunch, and a happy client called up, and he's like, I love you guys. You are just like Preparation H. And I paused, and I'm
Mhm.
like, I have never been called hemorrhoid ointment before. And I'm like, excuse me? And he's like, no, I meant that as a compliment, right? That you gave me fast relief. You came recommended. You did everything you promised. And after that, it just struck me that often we get so enamored with our product, but everybody is selling Preparation H, right? Nobody cares about your product or your service. They care about their discomfort in their rear end
Mm-hmm.
and want that to go away. So maybe it's being an engineer or a little bit more of a geek, but sometimes I just start geeking out on, oh, here's the feature. Here's how we do it.
Yeah.
Here's how we make the sausage. And when all that people really care about is, how can you make the pain in my rear end go away? And that's something that I always have to pull myself back to.
And you and I have similar problems because, I'm electrical engineer, and we've talked about this, and got a history in Kalamazoo as well. But yeah, talking about the details, the feature, why this thing is great. Sometimes you walk right past what outcome does this person actually need, right? Like, what is this? You mentioned the Harvard Business Review. I need to get on the Harvard Business Review. or get on their podcast.
Mhm.
And it's like, okay, well, why? What is the thing behind that? And I think people are really good at connecting dots to a how. This is how I can get to my outcome. And they end up abstracting their own outcome from themselves and from the people that can help them get there.
I would agree with you. And the other thing that I'm seeing today is people are optimizing for the wrong thing,
Hmm.
right? So many times, emails I get every day. Do you want more leads? No, nobody wants more leads, right? We want more profits. And what do
Yeah.
profits mean? Well, profit means that we're bringing value to the marketplace. We're working with clients that value what we do so much that they'll give us the money, right? So if you just want more leads, you can get those. Those are really easy, right? Doesn't mean they're going to turn into something. It's almost like the modern equivalent of Facebook likes and followers, right? Remember when that was so big? And it
The
was like, it
vanity
doesn't
metrics.
matter what that vanity metric is. What are you optimizing for? And, I can think of last summer, we had a prospect that came to us and I said, they said to me, I want to be in 100 interviews in the month of June. I said, why? Oh, because that'll be massive exposure. That'll do great things for my business. And I'm like, well, a I'm not getting you on 100, right? More is not better. Better is better.
Hmm.
But if you just want massive exposure, right? Just do a heinous crime. Everybody in the everybody in the United States will know your first, middle, and last name by dinner time, right?
Yeah.
Well, that won't help my business, and neither will being on 100 like random podcasts,
Right.
So what are you optimizing for? Is it just activity, or are you optimizing for the outcome?
Yeah, that's it. People don't think about that. They think about the how and they don't think about what that outcome is. But if that person wants to get on a podcast, we know one that is a company that sells colostomy bags that we could get them on. True story. And you think, we talk about the market saturation of podcasts. There's all kinds of puns we could start throwing through here, but that one has a very narrow focus, narrow audience that is high intent, right? You don't accidentally land on in the bag, right?
And
You're there for a reason.
and you think about the advertising dollars that they could get off of that, the CPM, or, cost per thousand, it is probably through the roof because it's a
Sure.
very, very targeted audience, right? Whereas Joe Rogan can't demand that per thousand. I think of a
Yeah.
podcaster that's got a whole horse network, right? People that own horses, man, if they own horses, they're buying a lot of horse equipment too. And,
Yeah.
it's a very small niche audience. And would I ever listen to that podcast? No, I don't have a horse. But the people that do love that and, love the sponsors of it too. So it's not for everyone, the podcast, but, what you're talking about is just for your ideal people.
I think I heard you say the advice that you'd give to someone being on a podcast is to learn from other people's mistakes. But you've interacted with a lot of people who have podcasts. So, what advice would you give to somebody who wants to start a podcast but doesn't really know where to start?
Uh, I would say start with the end in mind, right? What's your why? Why are you doing it? And I got this advice from a mentor of mine, Dan Miller, recently passed away. He wrote a book called 48 Days to the Work You Love. He had a podcast for the better part of probably 15 years. And he encouraged people, if you're going to start something, commit to doing it for a year, right? Because there's something called pod fade. And it's in the industry. Remember before I said there's 4 million podcasts, 400,000 have published in the last 40 or 30 days.
Yeah.
People will start the podcast and they're all excited about it. They tell their friends, they tell their customers, and then life gets busy. They miss a week, they miss a couple of weeks, a quarter later, it's an embarrassment, right?
Yeah.
So better to plan it out. Make sure that you've got a dozen episodes all keyed up, right? Better to
Mhm.
be 3 months ahead than trying to figure out, oh, what am I going to publish tomorrow?
Yeah.
And I use this advice for a lot of things. And I'll give you an example. Um, Years ago, every day I used to do a shout out for a podcast, right? just to promote them. And I'd put it up on my social media. And I thought of what Dan told me. If you're going to do it for a year. So I got 90 shout outs done, scheduled, everything like that. And they started to go out every day. And after about 60 or 70 days, I'm like, oh, I'm going to kill this off. Right. I haven't gotten any feedback from it. The engagement hasn't been that much. And then I was at a podcasting conference and I had so many people coming up to me and saying, hey, will you do a shout out for me? I love the shout out. Thank you for doing one for me. And all of a sudden I'm trying to think in my mind, how many more do I have queued up? Is this going to run out while I'm here at the conference?
Oh,
And I
wow.
had, and I came back and I still had 2 left, but you better believe the next thing I did was, get another 90 days there. And so I think that's a lot of times as business owners, we're so close to the gold, right? And we just stop
Just
making
beforehand.
progress. Right. Yeah. It's like
Yeah.
this, what marketing is going to work for your business, whichever one you're committed to. But if you
Hmm.
keep trying, I'm going to try this for a week. I'm going to try that for a week. It's that old thing about pivoting in your business.
Yeah.
People say they pivot. All I can think of is somebody with a foot nailed to the ground running around in circles. It's like you're not pivoting. You're just running around in circles. Pick any direction and go. And as long as you go in that direction, you'll make progress.
So we have an iteration of what you just said, and it's kind of the Cheshire Cat quote we probably use more frequently than most people. But it's like, if you don't know where you're going, any direction is going to get you there, right? And that's where people start to go all over the place. But if you have a why and you have a direction, that helps push through a lot of that period of despair. It's if you have one burner and 3 pots and you keep cycling them through hoping one's going to boil, none of the 3 are going to boil, right? So really having a good focus, to your point, put it through it in a year. And we were at that point too, right, Lauren? Like we were about a
Mhm.
year in, we did season 1 and we're like, what are we doing? Like it's so much time, there's a lot of work, there's a lot of effort. And to your point, you miss a week, you miss 2, you miss a quarter. And then we really started thinking through, what is our why? We want to have great conversations with fun, interesting people. And that's why we're doing it. Not to be the Joe Rogan experience, not to have 10 million followers, but to do that. And then when you put that in context, it helps you keep driving again, helps you keep pushing through, which can get tough and get really challenging at times.
And the cycle or the payoff at times can be so long. And
Yeah.
in this world we live in today, it's I'm supposed to be able to pay $1 on Facebook and get the analytics,
Right.
tomorrow. And what other thing in life gives that quick of a payoff, right?
Yeah.
You build
Nothing.
the business and after multiple years, then you're the overnight success, right?
Right.
After 2 years of podcasting, you're comfortable with it, you're good, the podcast starts to take off. And if you would have stopped, after 10 episodes or after a year, you'd never get to that point. And I even see this in our business. When we started, there were 2 firms out there. One was just a transactional VA firm. And I said, no, we got to do more with inbound marketing on this. They said, we don't want to do that. So I had clients saying, well, we've got to do this then. But I have seen hundreds now of agencies pop up, right? They try to copy what other people are doing. They make a big noise and then they're gone in 6 months. So
Mm,
that staying power, and I think clients see that too, right? There's a reason the older companies are around because people know they're going to be around, a year from now and 5 years from now.
yeah, I think that makes sense. When you're getting guests, what is your mechanism for acquiring guests, finding that target base, and finding the right people to work with to place on different podcasts?
Yeah, so we've got a double-sided marketplace, right? So we've got to find podcast guests and podcast hosts.
Mm-hmm.
So for going out to being a podcast guest, the vast majority of our clients come from hearing me or another team member on the podcast, right? So podcast interview marketing drives the vast majority of our clients. Also referrals from previous clients, referrals from podcast hosts
Mm.
that will talk to a guest and say, hey, if you want to do more shows like this, you should talk with Interview Valet. But we always look at it as, I believe in life, there's two answers. There's heck yes and no. So we want to talk with people, and we'll be really honest with them, right? What are your goals? Who do you want to talk to? And we may come back to them and say, heck yes, this will work for you, but we don't focus on those verticals, right? Because we're really focused. Business by far is our largest one. We also do health, nutrition, and wellness in there, and some alternative investment sort of things. So those are our main verticals. So if somebody's got, you know, comedy, you know, family, new moms, they might have great success with it, but that's not our verticals. And then we also walk through with them and say, are you able to find this audience? Could you use podcast interviews? One of the things that we see is that it doesn't work well if they are very, very local, right? No sense in talking on
Got it.
national podcasts if you've got a local business, right? A local gym or a local business. The other one is it a relationship sale or a transaction, right? So to buy a kid's book or a fiction book, I really don't have to know who the author is, right?
Yeah.
And so we don't do fiction podcast book tours anymore. We just do nonfiction because that's where the author makes a difference. And then the other thing is that the value of the relationship, right? If all you're trying to do is, sell widgets, I don't have to know, like, and trust you, right? It's a disposable. But if your business is built around relationships,
Mhm.
right? People have to know, like, and trust you. Then podcasts are a great thing. So we look through all of those as through the discovery call. And then if we're like, hey, we think we can help you, we take it back to the leadership team, put together an entire roadmap. And I always tell people, I don't care whether you not work with us or not, right? I want to give you this roadmap so you can see this is exactly how we would see a successful podcast interview campaign working. It'll give you a lot of clarity on how you could use this medium. Because at the end of the day, I believe life is heck yes and no. And I want the same thing for our clients. If they look at it and say, heck yes, this is going to work, let's work together, then we're off.
I love that you've sort of picked your verticals and picked your niches, because I think when you're first starting out as a business owner, you're like, oh, yes to everything, right? And then I feel like it's hard to become specialized or an expert at your craft, but it's so tempting to just say yes, even though you may not be the right fit, right?
Also, remember, we're 9 years in.
That's right.
And we learned a lot along the way, right?
Mm,
We have done fiction book tours. We have done other verticals, and we didn't see the results there, right? And
yeah.
we were frustrated. Our clients were frustrated. And it's like, yeah, I want to be able to look at a client and say, oh yeah, this is going to work. No doubt. Because that's really where it comes to. And I think it's that maturity of saying, this is what we do with excellence.
Mm,
People will come and say, can you produce my podcast? Can you do my website? And I think, yeah, we probably could, right? But it's like asking my dentist, can you do my knee surgery? I love my dentist. She is great. But she would come back and say, that's not my specialty. Let me
yeah.
introduce you to somebody that does. So I think that's a process. And I don't know that it's one where the business owner or the business makes the decision. It's really the customers are telling you, and you
Mm-hmm.
have to be smart enough to listen to the customers.
It's great
No, I really
advice.
like that. And I think another place where the know like trust cycle makes a ton of sense is if you're in a place in your career, you're in a position where you're looking for your next job, you're in a role right now, you're going to try to be promoted up, you're really trying to build that thought leadership and personal brand to collect and grab customer base, but also show yourself in an industry as a thought leader. And our space is interesting because we do a lot in marketing, we do a lot with data and AI, and that is becoming a ripe breeding ground for charlatanism. So like being able to speak and have a history, a track record of, we didn't pop up last week and become an AI expert that knows everything there is to know about that topic. It's like you have a back catalog proving that you might be the people.
There's a there's a great book called oh, Super Consumers by Eddie Yoon. And he was a client of ours. And I love how he describes that there's different people in the market, right? There's the pilgrims, the pioneers that started it out. They were there at the beginning, they'll be there at the end. Then you've got the people that are more like the mercenaries, right? They're coming in because there's profit in the market, but they're adding to the fight. And then you've got the charlatans that come in and they're just trying to take from the community. And it's interesting, they can always copy what you did. And sometimes they'll copy the copy off of your website. But really, it's not what you say about yourself, it's what other people say about you. And so they can make all the same claims, but when people start going out and see where they have been, what they have talked about, are they really the expert? Are they seen as the expert on conferences, publications, podcasts? And that's a quick way to set yourself apart, whether or not you're a pioneer, a mercenary, or a charlatan.
Mm-hmm.
As we're wrapping up, we typically have two questions, but there's one I think is extra special because all you do is live and breathe podcasts. But the first question we like to ask is, if you could go and have dinner with your 18 or 25-year-old self, you get to pick, what advice would you give them? What would you tell them, knowing all of the things you know now?
It'd be one thing: relationships are the ultimate currency, right? Relationships build with time. They're valuable. Inflation doesn't touch them. The things that I learned as an engineer decades ago, you can find on ChatGPT right now, right? Nobody would pay me to be an engineer right now, but those relationships of having a good character, knowing the people, that's what's going to last you your entire life.
I think that's great advice now, especially, I think, gosh, maybe I sound like an old person, but I think for Gen Z, especially, like, they look at relationships so differently. And I feel like everything is really digital, and maybe that's okay. But I feel like trying to get those relationships in person, in real life, in addition to sort of an online, more digital relationship building, there's two sides to that coin that need to be fostered and
even going back to the Gen Zs, how do you want to get your next job?
Yeah.
Do you want to get it by taking your resume and putting it into an AI thing and hope that you get picked? Or do you want to have that relationship with your boss, and when they get promoted and go to that other company and they're saying, here are the key people we need to bring along with us? There's one that I think I'd much rather have the competitive advantage on.
For sure.
Yeah.
And it's going to make you stand out.
In those relationships, not only do they take time, but it's consistent energy. It's not like a one and done. You're consistently spinning those plates to maintain those relationships, because they're high energy in the moment when you're touching it, and they decay rapidly, like a really rapid situation. And building that reputation takes time. It's like we had someone coming in that talked about Hofstadter's principle. And for anyone who's not familiar, it's everything will take longer than you expect, even when you account for Hofstadter's principle. So it's a recursive type algorithm that everything is going to take longer than you'd expect it to take. So you just can't expect those results to happen. It all has to come over time. So probably the last question. You already talked about a lot of podcasts and books. We'll touch about that. Maybe there's two more questions. But this one is, what's the last important thing you changed your mind on?
Oh. Wow.
Yeah, this is a tough one.
This is great, and I love it because one of our clients talked about, if you haven't changed your mind recently, how do you know that you still have one? And that was a big thing there. I continue to change my mind back and forth, and not to get political, but universal basic income, right? I believe everybody should be able to live, especially in this country, right? And I keep going back, and it's like, well, do you take away somebody's dignity if you give them $1,000? But in the same way, I look at it, and this was record it just after tax day. It's like if it takes us $5,000, if it costs us $5,000 to give somebody $1,000 to live, why don't we just give it to them directly? So I'm continually going back and forth like that. I love talking with my kids. They have a different viewpoint on things, and I'm always learning from them.
Oh, I
I
love
think,
that.
seeing things from different eyes is always important. And yeah, it's like the tax day thing. Oh, a good stimulus for universal basic income would be reducing the income tax rate. But that's a conversation for another day, which achieves the same goal. Back to the goal. How do we achieve that goal as a society? But yeah,
I have one last
go ahead.
question.
Yeah.
You live in podcasts. I want to know what the last podcast you listened to was. Like if you were to pull up your app of choice,
Oh,
what's up?
this morning, when I was walking, I listened to "Follow You Different" with Christopher Lochhead.
Okay. I
Okay.
haven't heard that. I'll have to
It's
listen.
it's a very interesting podcast. Christopher is a client. He's a mentor. He's really the father of category design, and he
Hmm.
has the most interesting and diverse guests on there, and
Wow.
asks them the questions that nobody else would. His mind just works differently. So yeah, follow your different with Christopher Lochhead.
I love it.
That's awesome. We're able to check that one out. But Tom, really great chatting with you. Really fun conversation. Awesome insights. We're going to definitely be able to use this in multiple different clips. So we're really excited about that. And yeah, thanks for working with us. It's been a lot of fun, and we can't wait to see what the rest of the journey looks like.
Thank you, Derek. Thank you, Lauren, for all you do.
Thank
Thank
you.
you. Have a good day.